Hey everybody, this is Rydo and we're back to video game news for Wednesday, December 18th. Don't have much as far as a catch-up to say today. I mostly took yesterday off and today we're starting late because I rolled over and slept in. Probably needed it, frankly. There is certainly a thought I had just an hour ago or so about, like, well, many people would make the argument I should just stop streaming and then I could focus more on the cleaning of the house, but in reality that wouldn't happen at all. Like, my main focus right now while cleaning this house is still not, it's just too mentally intensive and physically intensive that you really would just have any extra free time. And then everybody needs breaks, and maybe I'm demanding more breaks than most by saying I want to stream video game news Monday, Wednesday, and Friday for at least 2 hours, but you know, that really isn't that much. Plus I'm also taking a ton of other breaks that I really need. I need that downtime, and my point here, if I have a point, is to say don't undervalue downtime. Yeah, and don't allow other people to convince you to undervalue downtime or tell you it's not necessary. Yeah, you're a pure Ayn Randian capitalistic type person will tell you downtime is waste and you should just be working at 100% capacity at all times, but you're not a human being. I mean, you're not a robot. Human beings are not robots, and that's just not really how the human brain works and the human muscles work. You need that kind of rest. So in some of that downtime, I watched some of Secret Level. So far, I feel like that series is pretty much worthless, because it was really by the second or third episode they were showing me something from a game I didn't even recognize, and there, maybe they say the name of the game at the beginning and I'm just wasn't paying attention, which speaks a lot too that I just wasn't paying attention. But yeah, unlike the Netflix anthology of different animations, what was that one called? Love, Sex, and Robots, or something like that. I think one of the words was action, but whatever that series was, there was some very drastic different types of animation there, and they were bespoke stories from people who seem to really have a passion and a story to tell. Whereas Secret Level, it just looks like they used the rendering software from the games to render what is effectively just one long cutscene. And the Dragon Age one is about the only one that I think that's the first episode, and I'm not even sure it really is Dragon Age, but it's some dragon game. That was about the only one that I paid attention to before I lost interest, and that is certainly a problem with an anthology series in the first place. And it really was just like a cutscene intro that really didn't explain anything or go into any real details. It's all flash more than there really should just be a lot of story and conversations explaining things, as it were. I think it probably would be helpful, since you're making in a different medium and trying to do introductions to video games here, which is what I assume you're trying to do, because you certainly aren't making an interesting standalone scenes or episodes, would be to potentially have some outsider character that maybe followed along and asked all the questions to explain things. Or if you can do that more naturally to explain what's going on, that's fine too. I feel like I skipped an entire episode, and by the third episode there was just this person where everybody ends up on this island where they respawn after they die and are just immortal, but they remember it. So Yeah, but I couldn't even tell you what game that's from. That everybody just respawns. So yeah, thoroughly unimpressed with Secret Level. I watched the Five Nights at Freddy's movie. For the most part, that is just a movie that had Five Nights at Freddy's crammed into it. And I can't say that the movie is particularly good. I think that there's definitely some weirdness in it. In that the main protagonist, who is definitely old enough to be the father of the little girl character, is actually the older brother of the little girl character, but has guardianship over her, which doesn't really change the story in any way because he just acts like he's her father. Anyways, yeah, there's just an age issue there that is really messed up because they're way too different in age for it to make sense at all. It would have made a lot more sense in the movie for her to just be a daughter and then have the father, that they needed the father to be kind of a loser at the beginning. And then there's some other stuff that I think they were going to wrap back into and didn't really get to. But I'm not sure you even spend 5 nights in the movie at Freddy's. And I have no idea what the lore really would have been when that movie was made around Five Nights at Freddy's. But you're definitely not really playing the game in the movie or doing anything close to that. That movie is definitely more of an example of a video game developer getting very lucky once with the streamer success of Five Nights at Freddy's and grabbing the bull by the horns and licensing it out to a movie, which I would have hoped had gotten him a good payday. And Five Nights at Freddy's is still around, but it was never going to become the next Mickey Mouse or anything like that. Nothing is going to be the next Mickey Mouse. And then I'm jumping around Hulu. Still watching a lot of TV there, but not particularly anything interesting enough to even remember. And then I'm jumping around Amazon Prime Video for older movies. Nothing particularly interesting there. Started watching the Hitchcock Hour, but probably by the second episode, those plays that are effectively what they are. They're such old style of making TV, first generation really style of making TV. It's just too slow by modern standards, and just nothing really happens. There's not really a reason. A great example of that is like one episode, the latest one I think I watched, is just for kind of random reasons 2 or 3 different people decide to try to sacrifice this woman for completely different reasons anyways, and they're just crazy people. There's no more explanation, no more reason given than that. It's just like, here's a story of an incredibly unlucky person that nearly gets killed twice. Whereas modern days, you'd have something like a movie like Smile or any other horror movie where there would be a ghost reason, there'd be a curse reason. You'd get 20 minutes spent just explaining that the background reasoning for it. There would be a lot more talk, a lot more jump scares. You'd stretch things out, and there'd just be a lot more going on minute to minute. And that's certainly not something you're going to get with such an old TV series like the Alfred Hitchcock Hour. There was 2 Alfred Hitchcock shows. One was the hour-long one, and then I think eventually they realized they couldn't go an hour with all their stories, and they started to become more of a 30-minute long show. And these are early stories that I think predate Twilight Zone, so you may see stories that were straight up just redone in Twilight Zone better, and overall there wouldn't have been as much commercials at all. So when they say an hour, they probably mean about 55 minutes at minimum of content. A lot of the stories in Alfred Hitchcock shows would have been direct translations from either stage plays or books. And yeah, a lot of them might very well be translated from previous stories that would have been more militaristic or cowboys and Indian style. And so there was a lot of that in that first original series of Star Trek too, is that a lot of those episodes were the same concepts. It's just instead of being on a submarine or on a boat, you're in a starship. What, as sci-fi got more popular, I think Alfred Hitchcock being set in realistic modern times for the time, that allowed for a lot of longevity in these stories. So you pretty much can still tell an Alfred Hitchcock story today. You wouldn't have to modernize it too much, just kind of ignore the fact that cell phones exist, and you're pretty much in the exact same scenarios. Speaking of cell phones, as I'm doing a long catch-up here and warm-up, clearly I overslept, so I needed the warm-up today. Feels like there's perhaps a few new games down here on the SteamDB concurrent player base chart. It also is very possible that now that we're approaching a Christmas holiday break, these numbers may just change quite a bit. But yeah, there was one series that, now that I think about it, I probably stayed up way too late last night watching, called Abracadavers, which apparently is a 2-season, still possibly even a 3rd season, short run TV series from Canada, I believe. The name is weird because it really doesn't have anything to do with cadavers. The show is weird in that they talk about about their phones, but their phones that they pull out are old-fashioned landline phones that just don't have wires on them, and it's a visual gag effectively that nobody mentions. And so if you, on a second watching, you may start to realize that it is just this weird surreal world that they're living in, and that some things just are completely disconnected from a reality you would expect. It kind of gives the feeling like the whole story is just being made up in the mind of a child, and just being imagined, but it doesn't really play out that way. And it starts off in a weird direction compared to where it ends, which is where it ends is that all of the people in the group of friends have superpowers, and they're introduced into this world of superpowers. But it's more of a relationship experience, I would say, than a superhero series, and it's interesting in the directions it goes. I'd also say it's not that weird that it would scare off a regular viewer. It does suffer from one slightly confusing thing between season 1 and season 2, in that one of the main protagonists loses a lot of weight and looks very different so much so I went back to the previous season just to see if it was even the same person, and if they hadn't just replaced the character, or replaced the actor, not the character. But it doesn't seem like they did. So yeah, I would say check out Abracadabra, see if you can get into it. It goes in kind of a weird way, but more of a fun way too. Like, I don't think it's going to run into some of the problems you run into. It starts off that first season very much as a road trip series, and then the second season is a summer camp movie, effectively. I would say it probably feels closest to something like Legion, but it's nowhere as pretentious or intense as Legion was. The FX series Legion, based off of the lesser known character, Marvel character Legion, where that show went off the rails terribly, and I can't recommend anybody watch it. If you want to watch Legion, I say watch the last episode of Legion, and you'll see the utter pretentiousness of it and not want to watch any more of it, I suspect. Anyways, I think that's enough warming up for today. So, Marvel Rivals still doing good, and that probably is the biggest conversation that's happening right now, outside of still the I think somewhat manufactured controversies around the Witcher 4 announcement and the Heretic Prophet announcement, which is, I think, the Heretic Prophet, I think, is the subtitle to the actual game name that I don't remember. And apparently they had turned off the comments on that game's trailer, so they knew that they were courting controversy and that people were going to comment on the new character's bald, kind of butch look. One more argument that could be thrown at The Witcher 4, with Ciri being the Witcher, is that she isn't acting very witchery in that, let's face it, commercial cutscene that they showed, in that she's not trying to get any coin at all for saving the lady, which I don't know where you really would have thrown that part into it or not. Like a flash showing coin is somebody had paid her to save the lady. I guess what I would have done is, in the cutscene, there could have been when she says, "Go run to your father," she could have said, "Go run to your father, pay me later," and then that would have thrown into it, oh well, at least she's still a witcher, still killing monsters for money, so staying within that concept, at least. Remember, it's important for the witchers to charge coin to kill the monsters, because they're utterly hated otherwise, and they really would not be able to buy all the potions that they need and all the magical items that they would need to hunt monsters if they're not getting paid to hunt the monsters. They can't really be a charity, and it would be very weird in Witcher 4 if all of a sudden they are a charity and they just have some rich king patron paying them. But even that would still be kind of in line. It really would hurt the video game aspect, though, if you're not getting coins for purchasing items. It would really destroy the whole RPG elements and the shopkeeping elements of the game. So I imagine that will still be there, they just didn't show it, and that is kind of a big thing. I wish that SteamDB overall had a combined concurrent perhaps if I kept just an eye on what the 24-hour concurrent player base is for number 10, that might give me the easiest way to guesstimate how many people are playing games right now. I imagine increasingly we are seeing people play games, and we have finally started to see Banana, which I imagine has a lot of bots in it, get pushed down, whereas Banana has been like in the 4th spot. Path of Exile got a new update too, so it's got a big number of players. And I can't help but think that maybe a few people are playing Black Myth Wukong just out of solidarity of it not really winning any Game Awards. Not sure if anything else has really happened. Pal World arguably is fairly low considering a new update is on the way, but maybe that's why it's so low, is that the new update isn't quite out. Stalker 2 has not been able to hold a high position, which, yeah, that's not super surprising. I did see a YouTube content creator making a event, instead of having a Game of the Year event where they give awards to the best games of the year, she actually tries to find the game that best represents the year's releases overall. So she's looking effectively for the most middle game, not perhaps the most averaged game, which that's an interesting, snarky attempt, but it really would be so subjective that, well, the whole thing's subjective, but it would be extra subjective that you really could pick almost any game and say this game best represents 2024, which I would say, if I was going to do something like that off the top of my head, I would say nothing represents 2024, because nothing actually came out in 2024. Very little came out. And so when I get to my chart, your Banana ran for so long, it is going to still be in the number 4 spot for my purposes, whereas something like, what was the game I was going to compare it to? I don't even think it's on the list because it came and went so fast. Yeah. I've both forgotten the name of the game, and it's not on the list anyways. And something like Marvel Rivals instead is going to take forever, where I do imagine something like Marvel Rivals will eventually show up on this list. But I'm not sure how good this chart really is going to be. Yeah. See, Counter-Strike 2 has 5,194 points. You get 100 points for every time I sample, which is usually 3 times a week if you're in the first spot. And it usually is in the first spot. So, that means 51 times I've sampled, which, if there are 52 weeks in a year, this has been running for about a third of the year, I would suspect. Which means this chart really will only start to be useful next year, which is kind of what I knew. And then there is a question as far as how much tweaking and blacklisting, graduating of games should I do, because there is an argument here to say, well, these may be the games that are being played either by real humans or bots. These are games that are effectively not talked about at the end of this game of the year. Yeah. There's almost an anti-hype siphon on my chart because it is so long focused, where anything that pops up for a week and gets talked about, which is how most mainstream video game journalists will cover games, that just disappears over the longer spread of time. Of course, if you go long enough in spread time, then people will talk about Pong being the first video game on Wikipedia and then nothing else. You'll miss out on all that finer details of year-to-year releases. I went back and tried to see coverage and people talking about the Game Awards from Giant Bomb, which was absolutely awful. The audio was done terrible, the video was done terrible. You couldn't even hear what the 8 or so people in the room were talking about as they were literally talking over the Game Awards. You couldn't hear the Game Awards, you couldn't hear what they were saying. They have no idea what they're doing at Giant Bomb from that video. I can't believe they put that up. I can't believe they left it up. I can't believe that they don't have a better system than that. I'm not even sure the people in the room could hear each other. But yeah, if you were going to do something like that, then you would have had to have separately multi-audio tracked each person in the room and then let you jump between what different people were saying, which is not the worst idea. Like, Giant Bomb should have enough technical talent and bandwidth where they could have had multiple streams of multiple people talking over the announcements. What they did seemed to be intentionally either self-sabotaging or just overreacting to potential like copyright claims. Which, if they were going to do that, then they should have just muted and not shown the videos of the Game Awards in the first place, and then told everybody to open the stream and sync up the video themselves, which I don't think they really needed to do that either. So yeah, Giant Bomb was awful. Nextlander seemed not to do anything at all, at least after the fact. I couldn't find any videos, so if they did do something, maybe it was on a Patreon or something like that. Jeff Gersman is awful, and he's one of the judges at the Game Awards. He is still doing really low quality footage for what he's doing, but frankly, he's still better than Giant Bomb is. Second Wind, I couldn't stand because zero punctuation and British people talking in their accents and their just general chit chat was not keeping my attention. But they definitely better than Jeff Gersman. And I think there was a couple others I may have even sat through. So this year in particular, I wasted a lot of extra time just seeing if anybody else had done any insightful commentary and coverage around the Game Awards, and I don't think it did. And that definitely doesn't help me as a content creator, as far as thinking about how I might work around the Game Awards, whether I should do any of it at all. If anything, it really just proves that the best way to deal with the Game Awards is allow Steam to show you the games and have direct links to the games after the fact that are nominated and after the fact once the awards actually happen, as far as the winners. We have a Steam replay, so I guess Steam really does have a whole little system going here where they have their fall sale, they allow publisher sales in between, and then they allow the Steam Awards to kind of take focus. And then they have a Steam replay. And then there's going to be the winter sale, and with the winter sale will be the winners of the Steam Awards that are not connected to the Game Awards, which is a different set of candidates because these are exclusively games on Steam. So yeah, they are capable of just kind of double dipping on having two different awards, in that they can spend no energy around the Game Awards and not really be affiliated that much with the Game Awards. They definitely didn't feel like they were affiliated this much. I feel like Microsoft probably backed up a truck of cash specifically to not have Steam Decks being given away again, and to not have any kind of Steam mention or announcement. Maybe Valve was going to announce a Steam machine and just missed the date. We would probably believe that if in the next couple of weeks a Steam machine was released and shown. There is certainly a lot of dangers around going back to the concept of Steam machines, in that Valve may very well say, if you're going to make an ROG Ally X that runs SteamOS, you need to promote that yourself. Asus, in this case, would be the company that would make the ROG Ally X. And then maybe Asus is not willing to spend the money to promote it at something like the Game Awards. So it may very well not be a united front promoting the idea of SteamOS or promoting a specific device. But yeah, this year in particular, it feels like Microsoft wanted to push this concept that really doesn't even feel like it has a fully thought out plan of there being everything being an Xbox. They're really not explaining that well. And as far as top sellers, it seems like the Steam Deck is still very much a top seller. And as far as popular upcoming, doesn't seem like there's too much here to talk about. So yeah, Marvel Rivals really is it right now, on top of Indiana Jones, which I think people will probably get around to Indiana Jones whenever they want. They still are not really pushing a roll queue like in Marvel Rivals. The developers seem to be actively fighting against that, saying they don't want to force people to play certain classes if they don't want to play it, but inherently the argument against that is you're already forcing some percentage of people to play as healers when they don't want to play as healers, because the team will completely lose if it's just 5 DPS, I think is what they're calling it, damage per second characters or attackers. Feels like I got to the bottom of this scrolling here faster than normal. Maybe they trimmed down the categories. There is something to be said about that too, instead of over advertising. So for me, let's look at my Steam replay of 2024. I bet this is going to be pathetic, in that I bet I have not played really anything at all this year. Definitely not anything particularly new. Yu-Gi-Oh! Master Duel would be the only real new thing. So, according to them, in 2024 I played 55 games. I'm shocked by that number at this rate. 21 were new games, so does that mean I played a lot of old games multiple times? And what does it mean by new games? A year old game? I definitely did not buy 21 games that came out in 2024. I got 367 achievements, which is 132 fewer than last year. Apparently I played 23 more games more, so there might be almost an inverse correlation to that the more games you play, the less you're going to stick with the same game and get more achievements. Although at this point, I would say I kind of do not care about achievements, and nobody should ever really care about achievements on Steam. Even Valve never really cared about that. 17 achievements, 69 were rare achievements. I don't know what even gets you the rare achievement. A lot of achievements just to beat a game tend to be less than 30%. A lot of games, I feel like this year, the achievement to beat a game was in the 10 to 5% or fewer. 70% of games were played with keyboard and mouse, 30% with controller. That's kind of a shockingly high number. 41% of my playtime was Yu-Gi-Oh! Master Duel. Now, it's important to point out that just right now I have Yu-Gi-Oh! Master Duel running for the background music. I'm not actually playing Yu-Gi-Oh! Master Duel, so that's skewing the numbers. Definitely. And this 184 play sessions is probably just slightly higher to the number of streams I would have had this year. 16% of my playtime was Fallout New Vegas. Okay. I could see where a lot of the mouse and keyboard controls, I think, were Fallout New Vegas. I don't think Fallout New Vegas has controller support. And then Hand of Fate 2, I think also might... No, it has controller support. So, how do I compare to the Steam community? I unlocked 367 achievements. The Steam median there is 13. Which, if anything, I think that highlights how many people have Steam accounts and maybe don't even use them throughout the year or don't play that many games. A lot of people, and I don't know how we'd ever really get the metric. A lot of people, though, are just playing one game over and over again, Counter-Strike 2, maybe Marvel Rivals. They're just not going into the deep depth of the Steam storefront. So it almost becomes irrelevant when you know those numbers, that the Steam storefront has 10,000 games, let's say. It probably has a lot more than that. Like, what does it matter that there's 10,000 games? There could be a million games. If the average person is only playing 2 or 3 in their entire year, you're just giving a lot of options to people that don't really seem to need it or want it. And the next number gives us those specific statistics, and that I played 55 games. I know I definitely at one point was trying to go through some smaller games, which bumped that number up, I'm sure. But the average person, the median person, not the average, because somebody like me would skew the average much higher. But yeah, the median person here would be 4 games. Which, yeah, that's right in line with other game players. I keep seeing something popping up in my preview, but it's not popping up on my monitor, so I don't know what's going on there. Hopefully this isn't going to end up with some kind of crash. No, I'm not having any frame issues, so yeah, who knows. A lot of pop-ups happen. My longest streak was 68 days of playing without taking a break, which more than likely that means I had something like Yu-Gi-Oh! Running in the background some days. I almost certainly did not go 68 days without taking a break playing games. That's crazy. Even the medium here of 6 days is crazy. 8% apparently were games released in 2024. I'm shocked that it even got that far. Whereas 32% were classic games released more from 8 or more years ago. And then the playtime was 37% playing classics. 15% playing new releases, and then 60% of recent favorites. So they have this interesting breakdown from 1 to 7 years ago, which isn't the worst line in the sand to draw, to say, hey, we consider a game classic if it's 8 or more years ago. That makes a decent amount of sense. 8 years is a pretty long amount of time. Here we have a stats bar here where I was mostly playing puzzle platformers. Card games definitely is Yu-Gi-Oh! Master Duel. Puzzle platformer, and maybe several games combined. Puzzle games in general. Probably some of the overlap there. I did play 2 or 3 walking simulators this last year, and I don't know how many management games really I played. This is another example of where the tags may be confusing things quite a bit. Looters, shooters, probably Borderlands pre-sequel. I barely have gotten into that. I earned 6 badges. Almost all of those I imagine are from the looking at the discovery queue during sales. Discussion posts, almost certainly all of those have to do with the Steam Deck. Then I guess I got 1 friend request. Not that friends really made any big deal. So yeah, Yu-Gi-Oh! Master Duel was definitely a big thing in January and February when I was still really playing it. But you can see that by March there had been a fairly large drop off on how much I was focusing on that and how much I was really playing it. I would assume that's when I made the decision to stop playing Yu-Gi-Oh! Master Duel and make these streams somewhat shorter, which that did help, particularly at the beginning. Perhaps isn't as helpful now, as I tend to have these long side conversations and warm-up sections. Fallout New Vegas definitely started at the end of April and went to June. And with New Vegas there was a ton of achievements, but I don't think you can get all of the achievements in New Vegas, and frankly I don't think New Vegas was good enough for me to want to play it a second time. Inherently there is one like perk or trait or something that you get offered at the very beginning of the game, and you really have to take that. New Vegas was also very buggy, but without getting that trait you have a very different experience, and I probably played New Vegas on too easy of a difficulty, but overall I just don't feel like the story is that good. I would never want to really go back and play New Vegas and play with Caesar and be the just utterly amoral, evil, bad guy character that you would have to be playing as Caesar. Whereas in Fallout 3 I don't feel like they made an evil path that easy or that necessary in overall cases. I feel like Fallout 3 just balanced it. Your experience much closer to a role-playing experience, where Fallout New Vegas is much more of a linear experience and probably should have just been a linear experience overall. Played Hand of Fate 2. That game was very hard and I almost didn't make it to the end of the main story, and I don't think I actually did make it to the end of some of its side DLC. Islands of Insight. I spent a lot of time there. Very repetitive, more than you really need number of puzzles in them. It is notable that I have completely forgotten about the fact that I played Islands of Insight anyways. I should have made a separate video around this instead of doing this right now, come to think of it. But yeah, Islands of Insight has like 6 or 7 different types of puzzles, which puts it in a weird situation where if you like all the puzzles, you're great. If you hate one of the puzzles, you're screwed. If you are neutral on most of the puzzles, you're probably screwed too. It gives you what feels like procedurally generated puzzles and pushes the idea of playing multiplayer and making it more of an MMO for no good reason. It definitely has some weird MMO elements. The story is effectively nothing, and the puzzles can get extremely time consuming. But I just don't imagine that there's a way you could play Islands of Insight in small bursts and it being helpful. And if you play in multiplayer, you're just going to be spoiled on some of the puzzle locations, if not the solutions to some puzzles. Some of the puzzles are too drastically different from others, being time-based. I did play Cracking the Cryptic for way too long, making extremely long episodes to solve one Sudoku puzzle, and that ended up sending me in the wrong direction, I think, in that I spent way too much time playing Cracking the Cryptic and Sudoku, and those would be the puzzle games, certainly. And so, yeah. Inherently, if we look at the playtime, this is where things start to highlight. The 77% of January I spent playing Yu-Gi-Oh! Master Duel, and a lot of that probably was actually playing Yu-Gi-Oh! Master Duel, so it was taking up way too much of my time, and leaving only small amounts of time. I'm a little confused here. I wouldn't have thought I was playing Puzzle Chambers, for instance, in January. Like, the year has passed me by. And then massive amounts of extra time playing Cracking the Cryptic in February. Still finding a little bit of time to play some other games. And then a massive amount of time playing Hand of Fate and almost no time playing Yu-Gi-Oh! In March. And finding time to launch a whole bunch of games on my Steam Deck. March almost certainly was when I got the Steam Deck, and so those are skewed because I did not play Anti-Chamber or Castle of Illusions to make content, and then pretty much not stopped messing with the Steam Deck after April. Still spending a lot of time on Hand of Fate, still running Yu-Gi-Oh! But yeah, you could take this 40% of Yu-Gi-Oh! Or at least 20% of it, and if you'd subtracted that, then that still would have been 50% of my playtime in January was playing Yu-Gi-Oh! Then Fallout taking a massive amount of time, no real surprise there. Nancy Drew also taking a lot of time. That was a difficult game. Then Islands of Insight taking a lot of time. So definitely some major games that were centering around it. Punch Club 2 is another game that was very long and grindy, when ideally that was a management game that should have taken a lot less time. Just kind of wasted the player's time on that one. Torchlight 2, that's not surprising that took a long amount of time. And then in November here, it's basically when I stopped making content and stopped playing. So when I started playing Borderlands pre-sequel. And thus, that's why no other games really have even been launched in December. 30% of my playtime was with a controller, which is weird. How did I even play Fallout New Vegas with a controller? I thought that was mouse and keyboard. Maybe it wasn't. Yeah, I definitely want to play things with a controller. And then the streak went from April 17th to June 24th. which on that, this definitely was when I was messing with the Steam Deck, trying to get Castle of Illusion to run, and because it doesn't run on my computer. Then I just goofed around and played a DLC element that was added to Submerged. Not DLC, it was really just an update. And I played that on the Steam Deck and forgot about it, and I really need to go back and play it and make content from it. It adds a little bit to Submerged, but doesn't really do too much. Submerged announced a Submerged 2, I believe, which notably that wasn't at the Game Awards. So here we have a different way of showing things. And notably, I guess I could say I felt like this game was a dud. Eventually, this was just a time sink. This game is unique in that Rethink, in its original format, I think is way more interesting than the released version of it, which is more of a watered down experience. Portal Revolution I thought was good. Cracking the Cryptic, for being a Sudoku app, is not very polished. I don't know if there's anything that's much better. Sudoku Universe is not, I think, better than that. I didn't like the math of divide by sheep, and it just wasn't very great. Death's Hangover was just kind of a Pong game, and I think it was probably a lot worse than like Wizorb. I don't think I actually got everything unlocked there that could be unlocked because it was just too difficult. And the Fate 2 is very difficult too. Too difficult for its own good. Yeah, again with the Steam Deck I launched some older games like Battleship Brigade and Bastion and Castle Crashers and Carcassonne. Testing those out. I didn't make footage of that. Same is going to be true for Clue and Cat Quest. Donut Country, I did make footage from. I don't think Impressia, though. In fact, I don't think I made Donut Country footage then. I think I made it before, and these again are just things installed on the Steam Deck. So my whole playtime here is being broken down via the Steam Deck, as far as there's just a long list of games here that I installed, see how they played, and I can report that I think almost all of them play perfectly fine on the Steam Deck. Of course, I have a lot of games in my Steam account, Steam library, and only a percentage of those actually were playing on the Steam Deck at that time, and that percentage hasn't really gone higher. Tabletop Simulator was a very disappointing game. I thought it would be much more than what it really was. Then I started to make real content, I think, with at least this game. Wait, this is still Steam Deck stuff. Mostly I was making Islands of Insight. Surviving Mars, I did make content around, but really couldn't get into it. I think See No Evil also made content around that. But most recently, once you start getting into October, I was playing, wrapping up Punch Club, playing Torchlight, and then in November I started playing Borderlands pre-sequel, and that was the last time I really have played anything. And as such, next year may be very bad in it. For December, January, February, maybe for all of 2025, I may have very few games I actually play. So we could add a profile showcase. And we could share it. And that's pretty much all you can do with that. And honestly, that's probably about the best NVIDIA wrap up as far as accountability goes that one could have. is to just have Steam tell you. Let's see. Favorite game right now. Come on. Steam replay. So you can have one Steam replay. Let's go ahead and put that at the bottom. Just out of that. So you can start from 2022, which is probably when I started doing that. 440 sessions, 427, 31 new games. Then in 2023, I bet the number's about the same. 438 sessions, 499 achievements. I imagine something like the Lego game here probably had a ton of achievement. 27 new games. So yeah, less new games that year. And then 449 sessions, 367 achievements, 21 games for 2024. So considerably less achievements, although, and slightly less new games. So yeah, you do have this new profile page thing you can put on your Steam profile, which nobody ever goes to anybody's Steam profile. And that's probably for a good reason. Most people are not content creators, so it's not like YouTube. There's just no reason to go to people's profiles and look at them. Perhaps if they tweaked the whole Steam interface a little bit, maybe profile pages would pop up when you hover over somebody's name, something like that. But it's nice to have a profile page, certainly. It's just kind of not really needed, and every little thing added to it feels like something they had somebody do as a side project instead of it being something that actually is helpful or useful for people wanting to friend each other or convincing people to play games with each other. Inherently, I don't think anybody is going through Steam to find friends to play specific games. You're going through each game's unique matchmaking process. So yeah, I guess right now I'll say I'm happy enough, considering the major emergency that has just been this year and will continue into the future. I'm happy to say that I was able to play that much and make that much content, and I was able to at least have video footage scheduled up until the last quarter of 2024, which right now I don't have any footage scheduled. I also saw my YouTube replay as far as YouTube content stuff, and apparently I got somewhere around 200 subscribers, which probably means I lost just about the same amount. But if I was in the positive by 200 subscribers, next year I would be over 1,000 subscribers at that point. Who's to say they won't move the goalpost again and want you to have 1,500 subscribers next year to qualify in that small part for the YouTube Partner Program? I still am only at about a quarter of the amount of watch time, though, that I would need. So if I could get done with cleaning house and get settled in, maybe then I could super focus on making and scheduling videos. And so there, if a miracle happens, could be a point sometime next year where footage comes out and watch time goes up, and then maybe then I would be approved for monetization at that point, and maybe that would be helpful. It would be great if that happened, certainly. In reality, I'm not expecting it to happen, though. I imagine, even if it does happen, it will happen in the later half of 2025, not the first half. So, yeah, let's go ahead and actually cover some video game news now. Boy, that really was an extra hour. Let's go through Video Games Chronicle. I have to kind of apologize for that, and that's just another example of getting kind of distracted. Yeah, I just don't know how to really fix that. Perhaps we could start straight with news and move the tabs around a little bit and only look at games on Steam after we cover the news. Yeah. There is certainly a thought there. Since I'm labeling these streams as video game news, then perhaps I should move looking at the charts and looking at the and looking at everything else to after the fact. Although inherently that means I would just probably sit on the previous page that you just saw for a long time while I warm up. Yeah. I don't know. If I was better at this, if I had more viewers, I perhaps would make the whole warm-up section like a Patreon exclusive type thing, and then only start streaming after we actually get to the news. There's definitely an argument to do it that way, but that would take more work than I'm willing to spend. So, from Video Games Chronicles, videogameschronicle.com, the Game Awards broke a viewership record of 154 million live streams. This year's Game Awards was the most watched in the show's history. I imagine we will see those numbers go up and up and up. It is also possible that this year the Game Awards was in more places or less places. I'm not sure if it really was on Twitch. I'm not sure if it tried to get on any other streaming service that might be new this year. At a certain point there is an argument that they could be on something like Kick or Blue Sky or even X/Twitter, and that could get you more views overall. The fact that they had a bunch of parallel videos on YouTube, I imagine, helped a lot too. Having vertical feeds, even though that really was done very poorly, maybe convinced a few more people to watch it, having different language streams at the same time. Certainly on YouTube, at least, the Game Awards are being given special permission to stream multiple things at the same time, whereas your average content creator wouldn't be able to do that. I would say, though, getting more eyes, well, probably the goal of the Game Awards, may not really change much as far as whether people really consider the Game Awards to be prestigious or accurate. It to me feels like the Game Awards very quickly have just fallen into being what the Emmys are today, while skipping over completely the prestige that something like the Emmys would have had in previous decades. That now the Game Awards are effectively just controversy shows, and people are watching for the controversy and for the disaster and for the disagreement, and the idea of it being a celebration, I think, still falls incredibly flat with the Game Awards, particularly since they just rush around giving awards in favor of showing trailers and advertisements. Your Nintendo Switch year in a review is also available if you happen to have done any of that. I imagine that unless you are reviewing or going very heavy into Nintendo games, even playing 15 games for 96 hours on the Switch is going to be difficult. There's just not going to be that many games or that many hours you'd want to play on the Switch unless that is your exclusive console. Xbox could hold another developer direct showcase in January. Well-informed reporters are expecting an Xbox in early 2025. So I guess this is a rumor for a rumor. If they did have that, I'm not sure that they would particularly be announcing too much. Maybe some kind of update to Indiana Jones, maybe just showing the same trailers over and over again. I don't feel like there's too much new that they would want to announce in January, unless they somehow have made a mad rush to launch either a new technology to stream games or made a mad rush to partner with somebody to make a Xbox Steam Deck competitor, which I think they are mad rushing to do that, but I don't think that still will be available for at least a year. Witcher 4 devs say the new series Switch could be controversial, quote unquote, which is to basically say nothing. Witcher 4's narrative director wanted to prove the protagonist Switch was the correct choice, or wants to prove the protagonist Switch was the correct choice. Inherently, they had been saying for years that Geralt's story was done, so there was going to be a new protagonist. And so then they have several different options that they could have gone with. They could have gone far in the past with some new character, some unnamed character. Suppose they could have gone in the past and it could have been a known character. They could go far in the future for some unknown new character. Or they can go with Ciri. And they chose to go what I feel like is the very safe route, narratively, with Ciri. There is a real danger in whatever story they tell that even past what I think is a lot of troll controversies about a female protagonist and anti-female protagonist, that there's a real problem that people who actually played The Witcher and like Ciri, which I think is the majority of people who played The Witcher, may not like the direction the story goes with Ciri here too. If all of a sudden Ciri feels like a completely different character, that may be a problem. They already got away with changing how Geralt felt from Witcher 2 and Witcher 3. Because Geralt is really just a completely different character in Witcher 2 than in Witcher 3. But they made him better in Witcher 3. If they make Ciri worse in Witcher 4, that could be a real complaint. But yeah, there's definitely some trolling type images going along where they've like taken all the mud and scars off of Ciri's face, which is very much ridiculous. It just doesn't make sense that all Witchers have scars, and that's because of the training and the magics they do to make themselves strong. And if anything, I would say the scar is probably less of a scar than it was in the previous game. But yeah, that's ridiculous non-controversies, really. I still stand by my thought that the thing people really should be complaining about, if they're going to complain about anything on Witcher 4, which really you shouldn't. You should just not be talking about or caring about it until they have an actual in-game, in-engine gameplay to show you, which will look, I imagine, worse than this cutscene did. The real thing to be concerned about is certainly that the game itself will just launch like Cyberpunk 2077 and just be very buggy and very much a mess. I would have to assume that these comments now are from the narrative director trying their best to stay strong or double down, or perhaps just have people talking about The Witcher 4, which in fairness they have tricked people like me to talk about The Witcher 4 more than people really should be. The whole idea of SJWs winning in this concept, if you really are going to break it down to, there is SJWs in game development, which almost certainly there is, trying to promote more masculine looking female faces or more ugly women, in particularly in Western games. If they really are doing that, and if they are pushing that narrative, which I think there's probably a couple of people in every company that at least gets behind that thought after the fact, perhaps not actually in development, how are they really winning though? Ask that question, because inherently the people that are really complaining about that just don't buy the games, and the games aren't selling so massively well anyways. And if anything, I would say the anti-SJW, often anti-DEI group seem to be winning in corporations all around the world, and you're seeing corporations all around the world, not just video game companies, dropping DEI initiatives because it's not helping them make money. So yeah, I just don't think fighting the same fight over and over again really matters. Like, yeah, the danger here is that video gamers or trolls online pretending to be video gamers are going to continue to push a culture war over and over and over again, and it's just going to become this bland, repetitive argument every time there's a character released where people don't like it. Whereas in reality, if people don't like it, just let the games be modded. I guess the other option as far as who the character could have been a custom character, which that would have been nice, certainly, too. Let's see. I've seen a couple of YouTubers have fake 3D printed Switch 2 consoles, and yeah, there's not really much to say about them. If the 3D prints are accurate, it makes a slightly bigger Switch 2 with the button layouts just about exactly the same, so I don't think much is going to change as far as the physical outsides. The much more interesting thing, as far as whatever the actual next Nintendo console is called, would be the internals and the performance there. And even that, I imagine, is not going to be anything that's that exciting. Nintendo Switch and EA Sports Club Football 25 hit huge US sales milestones. The Switch tops the PlayStation 2 and EA Sports Club Football 25, becoming the best-selling sports game ever. It is interesting that a lower-powered portable for kids game has gotten the best sales. Perhaps that is in part because it's college football. Perhaps that's in part because Madden still reigns supreme, or at least it did until recently. Yeah, I'm not following the fandom in any ways around American football, so it may be a case where licensing and just licensing has just become too expensive for NFL and college football is going to be the way in which EA tries to succeed as far as football games go. Amy Hennig reveals a new Marvel 1943 Rise of Hydra details and concepts. This would have been the Uncharted director, or it's a forthcoming Marvel game. And I feel like Amy Hennig is one of the few female game directors out there that she might be the one that's constantly getting put on projects and then leaving the projects before they release, or the project releases and it fails, and that there's a question as to whether she's just tossed around more than your average game director might be. See, perhaps I pay more attention to the female game directors, or upper management of females, since there's so few of them, than I do males, and maybe it is the case that male directors also get tossed around and from project to project, from project to project more. And yeah, again, that's where, if I had time and money, I would make an IMDb for video game employees to see how many directors really make it to the end in the launch of a game, and how many launches of games have actually been successful under a certain person. Although inherently, I still don't feel like the management and the directors are as influential as they like to make themselves out to be. Yeah, there was something else that crossed my mind there, and then I forgot it as I took a drink of water. Yeah, I can't remember it, so I'll have to move on. Indiana Jones and the Great Circle update fixes Xbox lighting issues and some bugs. So, yeah. I didn't inherently hear people saying the game was super buggy, but I know DF Retro said that some of the lighting's issues on the Xbox were weird. The lighting, in particular in Indiana Jones, is a lot of ray tracing and very little path tracing, so they are in every aspect, I think, trying to get this game to run on ray tracing technology and not use the older path tracing technology, which could lead to a new generation of how games are rendered, making them perhaps render more, although perhaps a lot of games would skip that because it may just be more CPU or GPU intensive, probably GPU intensive. Although you definitely get a benefit from it, but not that big of a benefit that every single game, I think, needs ray tracing. Undoubtedly, if new consoles get made, which I assume they will, all new consoles will be heavily focused around ray tracing technology and upscaling technology, to the point where all other technologies are going to probably be ignored. Helldivers 2 is seemingly getting Killzone DLC, which, interesting. Crossover probably makes a lot of sense, though. Marvel Rivals has revealed a holiday-themed update as it has hit 20 million players. Yeah, they definitely needed holiday content if they were going to release so close to Christmas. The new content also for Pokemon Pocket is out, and yeah, it didn't really come with any new events except for some new solo player challenges, which is really just play these decks from the new expansion packs. And it definitely starts to paint a picture to me where Pokemon cards went or are going, and that a lot of this expansion, which is not very big, I think it really only has about 69 cards in this new expansion, where there was 220 in the original packs. So maybe it's doing more of that Magic the Gathering, where some expansions are going to be small and some expansions are going to be bigger. Maybe one annual big expansion. But a lot of the cards it's releasing are just new variants on the same Pokemon. There are some new ones, and it definitely have already seen that there's some new, more complicated things like auras that can be played with this new expansion, which may make the game a little bit more complicated, which it probably needs that. So it's a step in the right direction, but I would say Pokemon TCG Pocket still very badly designed app, very rough game as far as actually trying to convince you to play the game, instead of just trying to convince you to buy cards, which it's still very much built around that concept of having people buy cards just to own cards instead of buying cards to actually play the game. They still haven't added trading as far as an ability, which the second you add trading in, I think you will all of a sudden be able to own a lot more cards, and just have complete collections of having at least one copy of every card. Is this how Marvel Rivals usually plays, where it's more of this like Splatoon style gameplay? It seems like it kind of does. I didn't realize that that's what this was. I probably have said the exact words that it is exactly like that and completely not paid attention to it. I definitely think right now Marvel Rivals is terrified to make any changes at all while the player base is still growing, while they're still doing good. I imagine the second you start to see the player base drop down, you will start to see roll queues or something like that happen. I imagine they didn't even bother to program them before, as far as how this all goes. So yeah, I do think eventually they will add roll queues into Marvel Rivals. But they're gonna ride the gravy train as much as possible now. Amazon renewed the video game anthology series Secret Level for Season 2. I imagine it's probably really cheap. Plus, let's face it, Amazon just doesn't have a lot of content. They still, in part, want to be a competitor to something like Disney Plus or Netflix. Yeah, I thought I heard Arnold Schwarzenegger in one episode. Yeah. The fact that there's so many celebrities here shows that they're really just giving money to celebrities to do very little work by being the voice of characters. And so this is probably just keeping the likes of Kevin Hart and Keanu Reeves happy. Yeah, there was a Sifu episode that I barely paid attention to that I sat through. Maybe that was Dungeons and Dragons was episode 1, I guess. Yeah, I bet that was. Yeah, I bet this is in exact airing order. And so the first episode was Dungeons and Dragons, and I thought that was Dragon Age. Then the second episode was probably Sifu, and then the third episode with the island where people resurrect was New World. Yeah, and I barely paid attention past the first few minutes of the first episode. So yeah, I don't think it's high art. I don't think it's supposed to be a high art. I think there is just a idea here of Prime Gaming, which noticeably, it is weird that it isn't Prime Gaming Presents Secret Level, or that there aren't ads all over Secret Level pushing you towards Prime Gaming either. Like that, they're not even mentioning Prime Gaming. Whereas if Amazon Prime was doing things right, Prime Video and Prime Gaming would be working side by side to have both functionalities integrated. So you would go to the Prime Video app and then there would be a gaming section there, or you'd go to the Prime Gaming app if there was such a thing and there would be a Prime Video section there. That way the people could just bounce back and forth, feeling better satisfied for paying ever increasing amounts of money to have Prime as a service. Which, yeah, I'm not sure Prime as a service is going to be as useful as possible, as I imagine second day or overnight delivery is going to become less and less common, and Prime is in part going to, Amazon in part is going to blame that on increased unionization and union efforts in their warehouses, which is definitely the thing that I think most people should support, is that if Amazon is going to be a monopoly that employs significant percentages of the entire population, then they are going to need to pay their employees. We don't need to create yet another Walmart or a worse Walmart where significant numbers of people are employed by Walmart but are getting considerably underpaid. But getting back to video games, yeah, just didn't find anything interesting around Secret Level. There's a lot you can say around Dungeons and Dragons, for instance, but you can't really say that in a 30-minute or 1 hour experience. Even the live action Dungeons and Dragons movies, yeah, even the live action Dungeons and Dragons movies really not doing enough justice to Dungeons and Dragons, in my opinion. I need to hurry up at this rate. I'm going to run out of steam. Apparently, the Final Fantasy VII Rebirth director says the team wanted to add episodic story DLC, but Square Enix apparently shot that down. And in fairness, I think that would have been an insulting idea to do. Effectively, Final Fantasy VII Remake is already giving very expensive DLC, because you have one game that has now been split into a trilogy of games. So the second game in that trilogy, the third game in that trilogy are already $60-$70 worth of DLC for most people, because you're not going to start in the middle or at the end of a trilogy. You're going to want to play the entirety of the experience. And I'm not sure, but I would think that the save file data carries over from the first Final Fantasy to the next Final Fantasy VII Remake. So yeah, DLC on top of DLC is not what they would want to do. And anytime we've had episodic DLC come out, it's not worked particularly well. The best success would be like the Walking Dead Telltale games, and even that, there was a fairly high amount of drop-off after the first episode. And all the other Telltale games, there was very, very high amounts of drop-off, to the point where they really weren't encouraging people to pre-order or purchase the games unless they were just going to buy a season pass to get all of it. And the Telltale games are a great example of where episodic DLC fails, in that it is not an option, it's just mandatory if you want the actual story. I don't see how Final Fantasy VII as an RPG game benefits from episodic DLC. Now, in fairness, a lot of DLC may feel episodic anyways for other games, but Final Fantasy VII in particular should be held to a higher standard. Let's see. Apple announced the App Store's most popular games of 2024. I think we may have already covered these. Just scroll down here and see if there's anything worth mentioning. It's crazy that you just have a game called Township. I think a lot of these games are pretty old. Didn't know there was a Minecraft Play with Friends. Five Nights at Freddy's still doing pretty good. Monopoly still doing good. Plague Inc. doing fairly well. But overall, I would say this list does speak to how you are not serving gamers particularly well if they just have Apple iOS devices exclusively. It's no wonder that Fortnite was so incredibly popular when it was on iOS devices, because there's literally just no competition here. It's not even really new games to talk about, and their lackluster attempt with Apple Arcade is not cutting the mustard either. You know. So, inherently, I don't think every single parent that has Apple devices, iPhones, and is handing it down to their kids, I don't think that they're so rich that they're also getting PS5s for their kids. I think a lot of people are, and they're probably spending a lot more money than they should because of that. And I certainly can't make the argument that Android phones are much better as far as gaming goes. It might be slightly better, but that's about it. But it definitely is in my mind that iPads, iPhones, MacBooks are all just not really gaming consoles for gaming. Even Android phones, not really for gaming either. You can find a couple of things like Memento Mori to play, but not much, really. So it does make a lot of sense to me for people trying to save a buck to have cheaper phones and then buy a Steam Deck or buy a PC or buy a console. I guess PlayStation 5 would be the recommendation there if you don't have a Nintendo Switch. I imagine the vast majority of kids right now do have Switches. And so yeah, we probably will have several more generations of Nintendo fanboys. Although they probably won't be that loyal to Nintendo, considering all the nasty things Nintendo does. Let's see. Dungeons & Dragons Dark Alliance is being delisted. These servers are going to go offline and the game is pulled for sale in early 2025. When did this game even come out? This is a co-op RPG game. It was published by Wizards of the Coast, released in 2021. Well, I'd have to assume it hasn't been that successful since I don't even recognize it. And this, I imagine, is just a case where Wizards of the Coast either has another Dungeons & Dragons game around the corner that they plan on releasing, or they are just licensing out the same things. In a lot of ways, I guess Baldur's Gate 3, being based off of Dungeons & Dragons, may just be so good that Dark Alliance in comparison just feels awful. I doubt this is a case that Wizards of the Coast is trying to eliminate Dungeons & Dragons from the collective memory of people, although they probably are trying to change what Dungeons and Dragons is. Hasbro, owning Wizards of the Coast, though, has been doing some crazy things, particularly with Magic the Gathering, and so effectively the lore and the world building around Dungeons and Dragons, which at some point I guess Magic the Gathering was part of that, has been abandoned in favor of just having goofy licensed cards in Magic the Gathering to be sold. So yeah, I don't think that there is any respect for the lore of Dungeons and Dragons anymore, and Dungeons and Dragons already had major controversies that I don't think I can even really explain, between the 5 version versus the 5e version versus a 6 version of the rule sets. So for people who appreciate the previous versions of Dungeons and Dragons, they can always play those games on tabletop based on their own house rules or the previous rule sets, whereas these new things called Dungeons and Dragons that Wizards of the Coast and Hasbro are going to release are going to be increasingly different and disconnected. And that leaves a lot of room for other games, other fantasy games, for your average gamer, not a video gamer in particular, not tabletop gamer, to find something like Dragon's Dogma or something that they like, or even the Witcher series that they like, and not really have to go down the depths of the iceberg that is Dungeons and Dragons. Let's see, December's PlayStation Plus game catalog titles are now available to claim, which, yeah, every month, a few games to claim. Clearly there's some people that are engaging with that, but it's not really building any real enthusiasm. I don't think any kids are convincing their parents to buy them PlayStation Plus on the idea that then they would want less new games, or that would satisfy them in any way. Let's see, Elden Ring Night Rain is going to be played in a 3-player co-op or single player, but not as a duo. That's interesting, because I don't see how 3-player co-op would be helpful when to duo wouldn't be helpful, unless there are going to be specific decisions where you like walk through one door, and if 2 players walk through one door you get transported one direction, whereas if it was a duo then there would just be a tie there. There can't be a tie if the number of options are always 2 and the number of players are always 3. But if there were 3 options, then there could be a tie with 3 players, certainly. So, but yeah, that does seem very weird. I wonder why they would have gone that direction otherwise. I'll be interested in seeing when this game comes out, if there's a real explanation there, or if that is just perhaps a Japanese experiment of being contrary. Just saying, hey, we want it this way, so we're going to make it this way. Let's see. Microsoft CEO said being an Xbox player means playing games on all of your devices, which definitely feels like more of an ultimatum than it really should. But clearly a decision has been made, and they're going to double down on this. Like, all the advertisements, all the publishing, everything like that has been designed all the promotion has been designed. So for the next year or so at least, almost every advertisement is going to be the idea of Xbox being a publishing label more than or a branding label more than any kind of consistent unique hardware experience, which nobody has solved that issue. Certainly, like, one gaming laptop's experience playing Xbox games may be completely different than a Chromebook style or netbook style laptop that's very weak. But yeah, they definitely feel like they are heavily experimenting and considering not making a new bit of hardware at all. Which one of the Blu-ray disc drive manufacturers has said that they're going to stop producing Blu-ray movie players. So that may be a continuing factor too, is that if Xbox was going to create a new console, there very likely wouldn't be a disc drive that they could even source, let alone one they would actually want to put in their next console. Yeah, this commercial overall, why even stick to the Xbox labeling at this point? Like, in the center of it here, they are trying to promote the ROG Ally, but all these joke ones also show that they don't have this completely figured out. It would have been probably beneficial if they had some kind of standards, or at least said they were going to have some kind of standards as far as minimum performance, to make sure everything that might have the label of an Xbox would still be of similar levels of performance. And it is weird that this is the focus that Microsoft proper is talking about, when after all those acquisitions of new companies, the focus should be, here's a new game in development, here's a new game in development, here's a new game, 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 or here's some games we've already developed. They definitely don't feel like they are game focused with this advertisement in any way. So why would you care if something is labeled as an Xbox when you're not doing a 1-2 punch of also saying, here's some new games that are on their way, or here's some games that you can play right now? Like, I can't even name a Windows augmented reality VR game that is Xbox or Microsoft specific. Can't even think of something like that. So yeah, it definitely seems like they are floundering and trying to find the right direction, and I don't think that they're doing particularly well with this concept. In a lot of ways, it just feels like there's somebody new in charge, and somebody got a new idea as far as what they wanted to do, and now they are just shifting a giant oil tanker of a ship in a new direction without really thinking it all the way through. That does remind me, though, of one of the things I forgot to say. When I was watching the Game Awards for the third or fourth time, I noticed Randy Pitchford came up on stage, and yeah, I could say something about how he looks a little bit rounder these days, but that's just petty and catty to say that. The important news point, though, is that it said Randy Pitchford, founder of Gearbox Entertainment. Now, Gearbox Entertainment, if I'm not confused, is perhaps the parent company of Gearbox proper. But I think actually is a completely separate company from Gearbox proper, which Gearbox proper is owned by 2K at the moment, whereas Gearbox Entertainment may not be owned by 2K. But even if you can't get that information straight, because I'm not telling you the right information, the fact that he's labeled as the founder speaks very loudly. He is not officially admitting to being the president or the CEO of Gearbox Entertainment, which means more than likely he is not the president or CEO of Gearbox Entertainment at this moment. Now, Gearbox Entertainment may have gone bankrupt and shuttered after the Borderlands movie happened, but yeah, it definitely feels to me like he is transitioned into being one of these people who will want to still be showing up at the Game Awards, making presentations, being a celebrity of some small sort, but not really being actually active in the gaming working world, similar to people like the previous Reggie Fils-Aimé, previous Nintendo of America president, for instance, who is effectively retired and wrote a book last year, and that was about it. Or seemingly the same would be true for, I believe, Major Nelson, not seemingly working on anything either. There is perhaps a powerhouse of previous presidents and CEOs that, if they all got together and worked together for a new company, could be interesting, but also that probably would never happen, and I'm not sure anybody really likes any of those presidents enough that they could get together and get new hires, or I'm not sure that they would be able to share control or pick somebody to be in control. But yeah, did want to mention that. Ironically, next thing, apparently Borderlands will cut back on the toilet humor and meme references, says the narrative director. Borderlands 4 won't reference memes like Skibidi or Hawk 2, says the game's narrative director, which in fairness, I don't think Borderlands 4 should be referencing Skibidi or Hawk 2 anyways, because I don't think those memes are going to last that long, nor do I think that would work. You could probably have spitting jokes, not like spitting on a male member, but just spitting in general jokes, and that would play very well in Pandora. I don't even know what Skibidi Toilet is all about, but there's no real need for that to be. You could certainly have a severed head in a toilet in Borderlands, and almost certainly there has been a severed head in a toilet in Borderlands in previous. I will leave it up to people, though, to decide once the game actually comes out, as far as is the college humor, which is basically what I'm gonna call it, although in reality it's probably closer to middle schooler humor or high school humor that has been prevalent in things like Borderlands 1 and 2. We'll see if that humor still even attempts to exist at all in Borderlands 4, or if Borderlands 4 is just trying to become something completely different. I think Borderlands 4 is probably going to try to be something completely different, and that they've slowly tried to change what Borderlands even means, which certainly would be weird to go back and play Borderlands 1 and then have all of that redneck humor that is in Borderlands 1 and then play the most recent Borderlands game and it's just a hyper realistic military looter shooter that is totally serious. Borderlands, though, I think is just slowly losing its charm and not finding any new charm. But I do agree that flash in the pan memes like this shouldn't show up. And frankly, anything that's a more modern meme is not something you should try to include in your game. You should be trying to make your own memes, make things that are funny on their own so that people meme them. And certainly I imagine that there was a couple of things that could have been memeable in Borderlands 1. Yeah. But yeah. The newest Pokemon TCG Pocket set, Mythical Island, is out now. It includes over 80 cards. I thought it was just 69. But still, that's 68 standard cards as well as at least 20 secret cards. Interesting. But yeah, it really is just an expansion of buying more cards. And I don't know how long people are going to stick with TCG Pocket if there's just new expansions that just are about buying new cards, and that's it. And there's just no real focus on having events or tournaments or having people actually play Pokemon against each other. That may have worked very well in the real world, but I don't think it's going to work as well in the digital world. Although it is, I guess, worth applauding TCG for actually putting out content, whereas the Cardcaptor Sakura game still seems like it is implying that it's in beta, and while it has updated a little, it really hasn't added any more content after its initial launch of garbage content. So yeah, I'm about once a week jumping into that game just to wrap up the story mode, and then I'm gonna uninstall the game. There's just absolutely nothing to do in the game. It's terrible. I don't know why they would have even bothered with it. I don't even think like Asian fans would have enjoyed it. But yeah, I so far don't have anything terrible to say about Mythical Islands. Of course, I will say, with the initial launch, like at midnight when it came out, I saw a lot of Japanese people pouring, I imagine, a lot of real world money to get all the cards. So the real fandom there, I think, is there. So yeah, there may be a very large gap between people that are paying to win in Pokemon TCG Pocket, paying to win basically nothing, and people that are trying to be free to play. Well, it's being claimed also that Xbox won't have exclusives going forward. All Xbox first-party games are reportedly being played for PlayStation 2. PlayStation also. Somewhat believable. I mean, they really haven't announced any new games that would be an Xbox exclusive, and if they're not really focusing on a new Xbox bit of hardware, they may very well have just decided that if they're not going to have hardware, there's no reason to have exclusives. It may very well still be a case, though, that while things come out for the PlayStation and for a PC and the Xbox, they won't come out to Steam, or they won't come out to the Nintendo Switch 2, which is very likely that not everything is coming to the Nintendo Switch 2. I wish I knew what screenshot this game was from. It's a weird screenshot, certainly, to use without context. But yeah, this also feels like this is just perhaps speculation that won't be confirmed ever, because Microsoft's never going to come out and say that unless they got some kind of huge partnership with Sony, in which all of a sudden they would come out and say that. Moving on. Apple is reportedly planning on a foldable and thinner iPhones. New iPhone design plans have seemingly leaked. From what I heard, though, I heard something slightly different. I think they're planning on thinner iPhones, which would probably have battery issues, which they probably want, so you just constantly have to buy a new iPhone every couple of years. But then what I heard about the foldable is that they're going to take at least a year to try and get the crease in the middle of the fold to go away and be less of an issue. And what they're thinking is a foldable 4 times the size iPad. So it's an iPad that unfolds to basically be like a laptop without a keyboard, is what I heard people speculating on. It's important to point out, though, that this probably has nothing to do with games, and even if it were to come out, I don't know if adoption would be particularly high, because it probably would be really expensive. So far, Samsung's foldable phones and things all look really good visually when shown in a commercial. In reality, perhaps not that necessary or useful, and always they are way more expensive for less features and less power. So yeah, at a certain point here, if we are just getting to all phones or your average phone being foldable, there's an admission there that there's no longer a desire to improve battery life or CPU or GPU performance. And if there is no longer a desire amongst the manufacturers to improve CPU and GPU performance, then gaming will never improve on cell phones. It would be the death knell of gaming on phones if everything just is selling itself on being foldable and nothing else. Let's see. Stellar Blade's Christmas theme updates adds a new minigame and costumes. I think we already kind of talked about that, but I didn't realize it had a little minigame in it. Although, still not, I think, enough to really convince people to buy Stellar Blade if they haven't already been convinced. Alan Wake 2 update targets PS5 Pro issues, lets players turn off PSSR upscaling. It is certainly not great news to have the PlayStation 5 Pro come out and then the short list of games that have PS5 Pro enhancements also leading to a bunch of bugs and patches needing to be released. You would have hoped that all of that had been figured out before the launch. And I don't feel like there's a huge argument right now that I don't think there's a huge argument right now to buy a PlayStation 5 Pro unless you just want to spend a lot of money, want to avoid tariffs, and don't own a PS5 at all. Which maybe there's an argument for that. It is also worth mentioning that the U.S. Federal Reserve, not actually under the control of the United States, and yet somehow in control of the interest rates that all banks use, has lowered the interest prime rate by, I believe, 0.25%. This will be good news for anybody trying to get a loan or mortgage, car loan, things like that. It will be bad news for typically richer people who have savings accounts and like IRAs and things like that, investment accounts, because the prime rate going down means you are probably going to get a little less off of the money you've already invested. Such a small change may not change too much as far as credit card rates or anything like that, which are already way too high. But yeah, to see a change at all is interesting. But it is also probably too late to really affect anybody doing anything this year. Like, you would have to really rush to close in on like a mortgage before the new year right now, or get any kind of car loan. You'd probably get a car loan pretty fast. Speaking of cars, not very video game related, but California seems like they're going to eventually ban all gasoline only cars, which that'll be interesting to see what that does. Let's see, these are some older stories as far as unpacking calling out Nintendo. There, I do believe, is an update here as far as them apparently having a trademark, or claiming they have a trademark for the phrase unpacking, and then there being several things labeled as unpacking on the Nintendo eShop that aren't that game. Yep, and then we had talked about the Sonic 3 post-credit scenes having leaked. I don't know why these old stories get opened. I could understand one old story being opened, but 2 or 3 doesn't make the most sense to me. Anyways, we're already 2 hours in and we're just getting to the Gamatsu stories. Sega files a Project Century related trademark in Japan called, apparently labeled City of Wars. Project Century is one of the trailers that was announced, one of the games that was announced during the Game Awards, I believe. It's like a Yakuza game set in the past. Roadcraft launches in spring of 2025. Let's see. Sonic Dream Team Sonic the Hedgehog 3 update is now available, adding a playable Shadow. Bati Byteland Overclocked is coming to the PS4 and 5, the Xbox One Series, and Switch on January 10th. It's currently available on PC. A high-speed mecha action game called Project 6 for PC has been officially titled Omega Phoenix misspelled. Commenced Project 6. They've misspelled Phoenix here, I would assume intentionally. Lost Soul Aside launches in 2025 and has a gameplay trailer. It does say something, certainly, though, that here we are less than a week from the Game Awards and already we're getting new games announcing themselves. So either they were not invited to announce their games at the Game Award or they weren't ready. It does certainly seem like, to me, since Gamatsu is more Asian game focused, sometimes, that perhaps this was yet another Asian game that just Jeff Keighley decided, and the Game Awards decided not to bother to promote. Multiplayer hide-and-seek game Witchit is now available for the PS5. Exodus: The Traveler's Creed gameplay trailer is available on Gamatsu if you want to check that out. Battlefield Waltz launches April 8th in the West. Is this a visual novel? Yes, it's an Otome visual novel. It is worth pointing out that there has been, to my recollection, exactly 0 visual novels ever promoted at the Game Awards. Like, perhaps there is some kind of event that streams hours before the Game Awards that would cover those. But yeah, not a single one has been allowed to be promoted. Which, there's more than enough visual novels for you to potentially have done something like that if you wanted to, and that could certainly be the intermission and the bathroom break section of any Game Awards event. Certainly is it. Here's a bunch of visual novels. We know most people that aren't fans of visual novels don't care about that, so let's put this in the intermission and maybe have some orchestra music playing in the background. But clearly there is a bias. More of a bias than the fandom has a bias, because clearly there is an audience where English translations are still being made for visual novels and they are still being released in the West. I personally, if I was running the Game Awards, would heavily try to promote visual novels, if only as a cover to say, hey, here's some games that aren't violent typically at all, and even if they were violent, they'd just be violent in static 2D imagery and dialogue. And here's some stories that often are romance based. I would be targeting a new kind of audience with visual novels as much as possible, and using it as cover to say, hey, not every single one of these games is just you get a weapon, and you attack things for 60 hours. But yeah. And you could very much play the fancy trailers of visual novels, which tend to be very high quality for the high quality visual novels out there, as a way of catching people's attention. Let's see. A game called Demio Battles is now available for the PS5 and PSVR 2. If in 2025 I never have to talk about a VR console again, I would be kind of happy myself, but I bet that's not going to happen. Actually, I have very few Komatsu articles today. I wonder if he ran out of things to talk about after Monday's large deluge of articles. Yeah, because I started late today, and I'm going very late this afternoon. In fact, this whole day is pretty much shot. Which is, yeah, fine. Good day to rest. Just try to go to bed early tonight and not stay up all night would be the only thing to really tell myself. Project Tower launches January 6, 2025. I still hate this feeling that you get these articles about games, and then I feel like I've never heard of this game before, and it's more than likely because this is the first announcement of the game ever, but it just feels like I would like Komatsu to have a debut tag or on articles, or just a more consistent way of labeling announcements. But a lot of times the headlines may be the first announcements ever, but the headlines don't really indicate that. So yeah, I guess if I was going to make a video game news site, I probably would want the first article of mention to be labeled somewhere. Alright. This is a very weird looking game, and it looks like you transform into some very different looking characters. And then it is a giant looking up upon a giant bullet hell style game from the looks of it. Which I'm not sure this angle really works well for bullet hells. And then there's just a lack of detail that I can really see in this character. It just looks like a big blob of red lava. So yeah, it seems like there could be something here, but right now it doesn't look amazing. Let's see, Penny Blood Hellbound is now available. It's a roguelike game that leaves early access after 9 months. Let's see if I've actually seen this before. Not really. Be another game. None of these seem to have led towards Steam links, so I don't know what happened there. Freedom Wars Remastered has its opening movie. It's due out January 10th, 2025. Again, a game that's coming out fairly recently, this time an action RPG, and it's just totally not something that seemed to have been mentioned at all or shown during the Game Awards, when it definitely feels like it should be. Yeah. This feels very anime-esque. Taking a bunch of criminals that maybe shouldn't be labeled as criminals and forcing them to fight. This reminds me of that, I think the game was called Blood Rain in particular, where it was a bunch of vampires fighting against monsters. It was basically like a Dark Souls. There's some kind of like social credit score. Sentence in prison. Interesting. Some kind of number assigned at birth to people, so that you're born a criminal. Terrible way to run a society, certainly. Although, under capitalism, you're effectively born in debt, and if your country allows debtors' prisons, or effectively has a systematic system that allows debt to push you towards criminality, it's almost exactly the same thing. But yeah, another Japanese game trailer. Could have been at the Game Awards, wasn't at the Game Awards. The only Japanese games I even recall from the Game Awards were mobile games from big players who probably paid a lot, and that is certainly a thing that needs to be discussed, is that it was leaked that the cost to run like a 15-second trailer at the Game Awards has gone up, and it is really too expensive. It is getting to it's getting to feel a lot like Super Bowl ads, and that only huge companies can really afford to advertise things, and the cost is just affecting the show as far as how things go. The sad news here, it seems, the Nihon Falcom founder Masayuki Kato has died at age 78, which is never going to be enough, regardless of what the number of years goes. But it isn't so young as that it feels like it is particularly as random as some of the younger deaths that have been announced in the past. If this is a recent photo, at 78 he looks rather good. I wouldn't be surprised if he was I wouldn't be surprised if he was still fairly active right up until his final days. Apparently the current Falcom chairman passed away on December 15th. I'm not sure if that is the same person though. I'd assume it is. Founder, chairman, and former president of the Legend of Heroes and Ys series, developer Nihon Falcom, passed away at age 78 on December 15th. What's interesting here is that usually when we get to obituaries, they say very little and don't even give any information. A wake funeral will be held for close relatives only. That seems like that is increasingly being said for particularly Japanese people, because there is a case, particularly in Japan, where fans of the games might try to show their love. More memorial gathering is planned to be held at a later date, and the details are to be determined. Yeah, and that's always going to be the case. Unless you just know you're dying and you know exactly what to do because you know you're dying, the chance of a wake, funeral, or memorial being schedulable at the same time that the announcement of somebody's death happens is unlikely. And frankly, I would say the fact that this person is so public is the only reason you're even getting the announcement so close to when it really happens. Whereas I imagine a lot of people probably take a long time to even get obituaries and death notices out. Particularly in the United States, it's not really even a case that people read newspapers, even for the obits. So it's kind of ridiculous to put out a printed in the newspaper obit instead of just putting out notices via email, Facebook, Twitter, something like that, whatever your friends and family might follow that person on. Yeah. So, anyways, moving on to gaming on Linux stuff news, which I imagine some of this might be repetitive, so we'll try and burn through it fairly quickly. Proton Experimental has gotten a fix for Final Fantasy XIV, Neo Complete Edition, and more for Steam Deck / Linux. And we'll constantly get these updates, and unless you actually are enthusiastic about those games, that's probably not going to matter too much. It is nice to know that it's still being worked on. A Tactical Breach Wizards has a beta with improvements for gamepad and Steam Deck verification. So, another game working on Steam Deck verification. There's a demo for Comet Force, which you can check out. Nexus Mod has a new cross-platform mod, version 0.7.1, finally supporting upgrades, better modding for Linux / Steam Decks. The Nexus Mod app's fairly new. Fedora's Asahi Remix 41 brings AAA gaming to Apple Silicon with Linux. This would be for people brave enough to install Fedora onto Apple Silicon Macs, which I wouldn't suggest doing that. I mean, you're really going out of your way to spend too much on Apple Silicon to then experiment on gaming. I think the person in charge of Fedora has possibly changed too. I think I may have seen an article about that, which would be quite the change, since I think the person who's been heavily influential, if not in charge of Fedora, has been the same person from the beginning for many years. Crescent County is an open-world witch tech delivery life sim in which you travel around a motorized broom. Interesting. I'm not clicking on any links today, though. I think that might be a great way to just save time in general, is just until I fix the macro so that it automatically clicks on links. I'm just gonna miss some games. Tempest Rising looks awesome, and this RTS is launching in April 2025, according to Gaming on Linux. A game about digging a hole has you dig the stupidest, biggest hole possible to find potential secrets. Interesting. Although inherently Minecraft is a game about digging a hole, and they figured out a way to do that. Make that fun. A wilderness survival roguelike called Wayward adds creature territories, deities, item stacking, and lots more. So mostly the articles today are just about specific games. Stone Shard's major upgrade brings an upgradable fast travel caravan system, cooking, new locations, and more. While I'm looking at these, I think I could talk about the animes that I've wrapped up because there's just no more episodes. Rising of the Shield Hero just left itself open for another season and ended. And I kind of enjoyed it more than I thought I would, but I have to admit that that first season sets up something that you really do not get in the second or third season. Plus, the second and third season still have terrible animation effects for all the fights. But yeah, not terrible. I feel like I watched something else to completion, or to the point where there are no more episodes. I'm trying to move away from just watching the same variations on a theme where it's just like a fantasy person in a fantasy world. Those kind of dumb shows I was targeting because I didn't want to really think about it too much, but I've now gotten to the point where I'm not even paying attention to them. In the same way that I'm not really paying attention to Chained Echoes Ashes of the Elrond expansion being announced. A chilly survival game called Black Frost: The Long Dark 2 has been announced, which I would assume is a sequel to The Long Dark. Palworld Daybreak major update launches December 23rd. I think we'd already pretty much talked about that one. I might explain why Palworld is so low. And then these are older. Valve's new branding guidelines hint at Steam Deck OS for more devices. I don't think we're going to get any announcements before Christmas of any new Steam Deck devices, though. Yeah. So, Gaming on Linux today, really just talking about games. Not really talking about any software updates, which I wouldn't be surprised if we just don't see any new software updates for anything. It would be kind of crazy for SteamOS version 4 to come out before the new year. Though maybe all that would come back once in January. It doesn't feel like it would be too terrible of a thing. I don't know if anybody would really be upset if they waited till January and then all of a sudden Valve says, here's SteamOS version 4, it's totally installable on a standard PC you can build yourself, it's also installable on several other devices, here's a Steam machine ready to go, we've got everything you possibly could have wanted for Christmas now available in January. So if you didn't get it for Christmas, fine, save up until next Christmas if you have some cash from Christmas and want to spend it towards this new Steam Deck or Steam machine. That's available as a possibility too. Anyways, that's going to bring us to GameDeveloper.com. I still suspect all of these articles, because of my macro being broken, will be pretty much old things. And with new ownership of GameDeveloper.com, I am not thinking that there may be as many articles anyways. Apparently Activision and has quietly recast Black Ops 6 Zombies actors during a SAG-AFTRA strike. The SAG-AFTRA strike has been going on for a long time now, but they haven't really seen any updates. Developer survey reveals surge in underperforming studios in 2024, which, yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if many people claim that they're underperforming as far as studios go, or feel like they're underperforming. Inherently, the desire for constant growth is hurting the game industry perhaps even more than average, as it is hurting every industry in what we can only call late stage capitalism. And yeah, the only thing that I imagine will stop the desire for constant growth would be either companies growing a pair and telling their shareholders that they're not going to have constant growth all 4 quarters of every year, and then sticking by that, or more likely government control of some sort where taxes limit the amount of growth people would want. But that would have to be some major changes on how taxes and gains taxes go. And really, there would need to be just a breaking up of major investment companies, which that could help quite a bit, certainly, too. But also 100% taxes over $1 million, $1 billion, anything like that would also be very helpful in limiting the desire for constant, unchecked growth. Let's see. Game Developers 2024 wrap-up is 10 must-read featured blogs. So here effectively are advertisements for featured/paid promotion featured blogs, which I've never been a fan of their featured blogs anyways, because they seem to be kind of irrelevant, but it also certainly speaks to something that they could only pick 10 out of the course of an entire year to promote again. Even these screenshots don't really catch my attention. Let's see, This Is Comedy, quote, Belertra developer Local Thunk baffled by PEGI handing it an 18+ rating. The award-winning game developers questioned the consistency of the PEGI rating. I imagine PEGI has a hard line on gambling, and because the game looks like gambling, or simulating a gambling game, I imagine it just gets a that is the reason. Yeah, they're claiming it features prominent gambling imagery and essentially teach players how to navigate a poker game. So yeah, they're taking the hardline stance that it's a gambling game. Which I would wonder what their consistency there is for every other card-based solitaire game out there, because they are definitely drawing an extremely thin line for every like match 2 solitaire game that also would be using card games. But yeah, as a United Statesian, though frankly I can't really rant and rave too much about the horrors of the PEGI rating system or the Japanese SARA rating system, or the total censorship that is the Chinese government approval system, or the Australian rating system, which is totally government censorship too, or the German rating system. There's another censorship one that kind of makes sense in that case, but not greatly. But I can't complain about any of those with knowing the fact that the ESA and running the ESRB is kind of just as bad. And even if the United States did get rid of the ESRB rating system, and somehow then that didn't cause the United States government to create a government-run rating system, even if we somehow did have pure free speech as far as the releasing of games, which is releasing is really the main thing. Is this game available for purchase because it's 18 plus? Probably. Is it being hidden on certain storefronts because it's PEGI 18? Maybe. Are storefronts in those areas required to do age verification and take people's privacy away to purchase this game? Maybe. I don't even know. But yeah, inherently Nintendo and Sony and Microsoft are still also applying censorship based on inconsistent rules. Balertro is an example of a game though that is available for purchase on Steam. Perhaps you would need a VPN to purchase it in certain countries on Steam and making a different Steam account, which might cause you problems and might get you back banned off of Steam. So I don't know what you'd really do there. But yeah, ESRB is a mess. Nintendo, PlayStation's, Microsoft's internal censorship is a mess. When getting away from the censorship aspect and just think about, should people be warned about the content of a game? I kind of do agree that some kind of warning about the content in the game should be on every single game. That being said, PEGI is not doing an appropriate job here by labeling it 18 plus. I just don't think that's fair. This is the equivalent of a hyper-conservative parent not allowing a 12-year-old to play with a deck of cards because all decks of cards lead to gambling. Which I'm not even sure the Amish would be that controlling in general. That I'm not sure. Maybe, maybe not. Meanwhile, on mobile, plenty of other games have cards on them. Moving on, though. Let's see. Catly was a game that was announced, and now the developer is denying it used generative AI or blockchain technology in its cute cat game. I don't know if this isn't perhaps a non-controversy that they're making up to just get more coverage, or whether there actually was some rumors around that or not. I don't know what specifically. I don't remember this trailer enough to think that there would have been any thought that might be the case. Looking at this trailer, it just does not feel. It doesn't feel like there's anything AI generated here so far. It just feels like maybe what this game turns out to finally be maybe AI generated. Yeah. Looking at that trailer, it seems like it is going to just be more of an asset flip room builder with cats. I don't know if there's anything more to it than that. it's certainly not a great precedent if all of a sudden every single person comes out of the front and says they don't have generative AI or blockchain technology in their game. But, you know, it's not the worst thing to say, too. It's just to have a disclosures page with all of your development. But of course, if you disclose that at the beginning, and then all of a sudden you decide you want to use generative AI, then people will get upset with you. And so for most companies, they're not going to bother to deny something. They'll just say no comment, like most responses. But yeah, I haven't heard anybody actually talk about Catly that much to justify them having to come out and deny. Apparently, League of Legends skins won't get custom voice overs while the SAG-AFTRA strike Formosa Interactive, which I guess that's probably for the better, instead of trying to hire scabs to do the voice work otherwise. I don't know if League of Legends players particularly care that much about custom voiceovers. I don't know how League of Legends players are really going to feel about this. We are starting to see certainly game development companies though trying to put all the blame on striking voice actors and still take none of the blame themselves for the fact that they are not really negotiating in good faith as far as what the voice actors make, and they're not doing anything really to try to make the game development industry a industry that somebody can make a lifelong career in. Let's see, Dark Passenger raises $3 million to fund its debut multiplayer game. This all feels like news stories. Ionic has netted €152 million investment to support studios and fund future acquisitions. Never heard of Ionic. I don't recognize them at least. Let's see. Then they are doing more wrap-ups, I guess, and 10 must-read deep dives, which I don't find the deep dives from GameDeveloper.com particularly that interesting either, mostly because they're kind of spoilery in talking about relatively new games. Yeah, the only one that really would have caught my attention would be Slay the Princess, but I'm also trying not to spoil myself on Slay the Princess because I think I actually do want to play that game eventually. Flashbulb Games has confirmed layoffs after scrapping an unannounced project. I don't feel like Flashbulb Games is the same company that I'm thinking of. I think there's a game called Dimbulb that is, I remember. So yeah, I think this is a completely different company than what I'm thinking about. Astrobot, Balocho, and Metaphor ReFantagio sweeped the Game Awards, which in fairness, it is hard to say the Game Awards actively went out of their way to exclude Japanese games when Metaphor ReFantagio did win awards. I would say, though, there is a style of Japanese games, many styles of Japanese games that are just not getting trailers and not getting promoted, and perhaps you could draw a line and say that the game judges gave Metaphor ReFantagio awards, but Jeff Keighley, the person who more than likely personally approved all the ads and trailers, is more of the problem there. But yeah, I think still a lot of people felt like it was weird for Astrobot to win Game of the Year, and then for so many other of the nominations to be effectively snubbed. Inherently, this is the problem with awards in general. that they really should just give awards to every single nominee at the entirety of it, and just say, you know what, we're going to give 5 games Game of the Year, and instead of a #1 Game of the Year. But yeah, particularly when it comes down to celebrating video games, they're so incredibly long, so incredibly different. It's just ridiculous to have one game, and particularly Astrobot, be the Game of the Year for the Game Awards compared to every other game that came out. Even the movie awards don't really make a lot of sense to say one movie, which is going to be completely different from another movie, deserves to be exalted above the other. Yeah. I think what you could really do, particularly if you're going to have a People's Choice Awards, is just have a number of votes necessary to be given a Game of the Year award. And if the people or a judge panel says that 7 out of 10 of their people, 70% of the people, say yes to this game, that they like it, it gets Game of the Year award, and that's it. Yeah. I mean, you really would have to give, in my mind, out 10, 20, 30 Game of the Year awards before you start to really devalue what Game of the Year means, because it's so valueless even now. But yeah, the whole Olympics concept, comparing it to the Olympics where it's a first, second, and third, while ignoring the fact that the Olympics have actual number metrics and actual judge panels giving out scores to the first decimal point often. Yeah, it's just kind of ridiculous. I really hate the Highlander there can only be one concept here. It's just not realistic in the real world. How many valedictorians in every single graduation class happen around the world? I mean, there's one for every school at the very least, and many schools have very few people in them. Some schools have hundreds of students graduating in that year, but some schools have 10, 20, 30 people graduating in that year. Does that devalue being the valedictorian at school? No. It still has the same value it always had. Same really should be done for video games. It would be awkward, certainly, but it would make a lot more sense. And you could certainly do it just by sales numbers, too. And then make the People's Choice be based on people buying the game. Steam could get really sleazy and do that, too. They could say, hey, if you want this game to win, you have to purchase the game. Of course, then they'd probably get a lot of refunds after the fact if they did something like that. Anyways, moving on, a new developer, Clover's Studio, has teamed up with Capcom on an Okami sequel. Epic Games has secured a deal to pre-install Fortnite on Android phones in the UK and Spain. Interesting. This is from Telefonica. So if you have that cell phone provider in the UK, then Fortnite would just show up on your phone by default. Let's see. 461 employees at ZeniMax Online Studios have unionized. So we are seeing more and more unionization succeed inside of Microsoft. I don't think Microsoft dare to really challenge it. That being said, my concerns about ZeniMax actually delivering a product are certainly still very high, and them being unionized perhaps doesn't improve my my opinion there. ZeniMax Online Studios, I would assume, is exclusively working on Elder Scrolls Online, which is a game that is still around and still making money. Protections against layoffs and workplace exploitation is what unions try to create and often succeed at creating. Unfair layoffs, at least, but often protections against layoffs in general. Don't think I really care about their patch notes articles from GameDeveloper.com. WB Montreal, in sharp contrast, has laid off 99 developers. They were subcontract, mostly, or subcontractors through the developer keywords. And one assumes that a lot of this has to do with Suicide Squad being shut down or being abandoned effectively. Ex-Marathon director Chris Barrett sues Sony and Bungie after unfounded firing. This is an older story, so I imagine the rest of these are still old stories. So we'll go through these very quickly. Then we'll go through all the games on Steam. And again, I'm running late today, starting late and running late. Now I very well know I'm starting late because I woke up early and then turned off my alarm clock and then rolled over and went back to sleep. This is not usually the kind of game I would say yes to. I'm gonna be generous today. And so yeah, I definitely know that there was a mistake made there. But that was the direct effect of me waking up late today. The longer effect was probably staying up too late last night watching Abracadabras. I feel like there was another anime I watched on Hulu that I watched all the way to the end and then kind of immediately forgot. I do have to admit that the animes out now are not 100% my taste compared to what they were. The animes that were out when I was an edgelord teenager many years ago. There's a lot more sci-fi stuff, and I think there was just in general a lot more filtering going on, so only the best of the best really would make it to the West, whereas now Hulu can just take every single garbage isekai show and air it at the same time that it airs in Japan. There's a couple of shows I've started and I'm not sure I'm gonna stick with, like Assassination Classroom. I've never watched that, and they announced a new season there. And Fire Force, which I'm not sure I'll stick with that either. But yeah, that's all more stuff that also is taking up too much of my time. I need to be careful. I need to find an hour or two to actually accomplish some house cleaning and then only treat myself to watching shows after I've actually accomplished something and need some downtime. Inherently I'm not I'm not good at managing my own time, and I don't think most people are. I don't think other people are good at managing other people's time either. I'm trying to think if I ever was good at managing time. I don't think I really was. When you're in school, you have just a strict schedule, and so as long as you show up in the room, you've managed your time as much as possible. But as far as projects managing, I think most people struggle with that, and certainly there's people that wouldn't show up in the right room at the right times, or would just show up and then immediately fall asleep. And depending on the teacher, there was a lot of teachers that would just let people fall asleep. Yeah. You run into kind of a shock once you get into college, and then you are given more control. Nobody's going to look for you, nobody's going to care if you didn't show up for class in college, whereas that they do look for you and do care if you don't show up for class in high school. It seems like we've got some more tabs that are all over the place. A short animated novel called One Room Yui Hanasake Saka Memorial has been announced for PC. Interesting. Then here we have what is probably, I would call, an anime asset flip game, except for the fact that it's focused around actual fighting and is VR. It's an interesting thought, certainly. In VR, hand-to-hand fighting, I feel like you're going to fling your controller all across the room, which I think is a danger in pretty much all VR things. It's also kind of interesting that it's hand-to-hand fighting, seemingly intergendered, between mostly anime girls and at least one anime boy. And while there are anime series where you see characters fighting, they tend not to just look like this, and I don't think that fighting anime, whether it's Dragon Ball Z or something else, ever really inspired people to want to be interacting with that. Yeah. Even the most annoying characters out of anime series are not ones I think you would really want to punch in VR. I'm gonna give this a chance, even though it's probably nothing. I could say yes, I need to do another follow list cleanup, but let's be realistic. I'm not gonna get around to it. If I was gonna get around to it, I would have done that a long time ago. I think this game just came out of early access, so I'll make another YouTube short around it. Yeah. It is, I guess, somewhat surprising that there isn't a Slap the Devil style game out there. Like, certainly there's politicians that you could make a video game around political parody of slapping them, but I'm not sure Steam would allow that. Yeah. It is kind of surprising that there isn't something like a Pure Flix for video games that every now and then tries to make even small things. Inherently, though, I think a significant portion of highly religious focused people still want video games to be the enemy, and so they wouldn't waste of money or try to make anything more religiously focused that way. Plus, you wouldn't have much of a game if it was just here's a simulation where you're punching or slapping the devil. I could see maybe a VR game where you're playing as the exorcist in an exorcist-like game, exorcising a demon in front of you. I suppose if you went down the entire list of every single movie, big name movie, you probably would have several concepts that could be turned into video games. But you got to figure out how to make the gameplay mechanic work first and foremost. Most people don't actually think of a gameplay mechanic as much as they just steal popular gameplay mechanics that already exist from other games. A certain level, I guess Doom is slapping the devil and that you are shooting demons. It's kind of crazy how much religious people are anti games like Doom when at the core of it you are killing demons. I feel like there probably was a mod at some point where you would play as the demons attacking the Doom guy for the original Doom. We're getting an increase in like Russian roulette games coming out on Steam also. And yeah, not a bad number of games that we've seen so far either. The game was about cogs. I saw an interesting video on a variable rate transmission using gears, which, if that actually became a thing in cars, would have significant efficiency as far as torque in cars. Because you basically wouldn't need gearboxes at that point. Instead, you would use that. The problem though is going to be just testing it and getting it to work, and time overall, because even if you did have a gear-based variable rate transmission in cars, it would be in non-electric cars, because non-electric cars are the only thing that would need a transmission, whereas every single electric car, if they just become the default, which one assumes that they will become the default, then the motors on them don't need transmission. Alright, so we have a weird situation here. Night Shift Nurses is also the title of a hentai anime. I think it has nothing to do with this game at all. I think this is definitely potentially cross-media name confusion that's being made here. That being said, there is no tag here that in any way indicates that there is any adult content. There is half an hour of gameplay. I think for that reason only, I should probably not promote it. But yeah. I don't know about in Japan, but also it's worth pointing out that nurses in the United States do not dress like this. They did it perhaps decades ago, but they do not have little hats or tend to wear any hats at all, which is kind of funny when you think about it, that people preparing food need hair nets, but people that are just generally acting as nurses don't require any of that. Now, they do require hair nets when they're in surgery. They don't want hairs getting inside open wounds, but yeah, they're not so concerned about it in general nursing. But yeah, they don't really wear aprons, they don't really wear pink, they don't really wear those kinds of outfits at all in the United States. Very positiveness on this though. I shouldn't be so picky and say I'm not going to make a YouTube short, which is the lowest barrier of actors to make a YouTube short, just because it's a short game. So I'll make a YouTube short on this, and potentially I will get a lot of views that will lead to a lot of disappointment for the insane people who would be looking for night shift nurses, the hentai anime on YouTube. But yeah, I don't feel like there is a lot of adult content that has slipped by on YouTube. It's probably a little, but it will eventually get flagged, I'm sure. And see, we've gone long enough that I am fairly certain we've gone through all of the tabs, so I don't have to worry about that like I did in the previous stream. So yeah, started late, ending late. Apologies for that, I guess. We overall got everything done that needed to be done, or that will get done, I guess. I should do a follow list cleanup. I recognize that. I should schedule videos, I recognize that, but I probably will do none of that as I'm still in the middle of a major emergency and need to clean house. Anyways, that's going to be it for this recording. As always, I ask you to like, share, subscribe, comment, and keep on watching. Thanks.